Hi, and welcome to day two, part two of game night here at the 43rd Asian American International Film Festival. We're so excited to have enough game devs said yes to us to do a part two of our kind of exploration of video games and developers of color for this year's online film festival. I'm joined by a ton of awesome developers. And so we're actually just going to go through their games really quickly. And then we actually have a bonus game at the end as well. And so we're going to start off with Brian and Free Agency. You saw the trailer right before the panel started. But Brian, could you talk a little bit about what Free Agency is as I click through?
Sure. Free Agency is the life simulation game where agents gradually become self-aware and try to find meaning in their own life. Meanwhile, you have to keep them too busy to think about it.
So what was the inspiration for the game?
It's a life simulation, so it's definitely inspired by just trying to live and work and trying to be and exist with other people, however isolated we might be. I think the quarantine and lockdown maybe even, accentuated that feeling of just being off, siloed in our separate rooms. But it's inspired by a lot of things. Maybe having a mini existential crisis while playing The Sims, and getting my little characters to get good at the piano and whatnot when I fail to do so in my own life. It's inspired by a bunch of films as well, and some other games too.
What type of films was it inspired by?
Sure. There's a lot of films that sort of explore the, simulation hypotheses and skeptical hypotheses, like, for example, The Truman Show, or The Matrix, or Existence, or Synecdoche, New York. Just all these kind of simulations within a simulation, all kind of were definitely inspiring as to part of this.
And I guess you kind of brought up quarantine and the pandemic. Did you start developing this pre all of this happening, or was this semi-inspired by all of us being forced to stay inside?
No, it started before that, before any of that happened. But it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think your I guess like partner in your studio, GJ, was on last week's show, and I think there's definitely some style crossover. I guess what inspired you to kind of mimic some of that visual choices? So in particular, there are these choices of kind of textures, both real kind of photographic textures and more kind of built textures, as well as the sound design is a mixture of kind of real sounds and kind of more manufactured sounds.
Sure, yeah. I didn't really think about the similarities, but both of them have a lot to do with memory and nostalgia. And so some of that collage and pastiche effect is coming through in that in both games. You might see some things that look like older operating systems, some things that might look like Windows 3.1 or Windows 95 or Mac OS. It's kind of just this mixed up collage, just like how your own memories might be a little bit inaccurate, and sort of a mix of all things. And we are sort of referencing these older systems because, I mean, it's a computer simulation. These characters are not real. They're artificial intelligence agents. You'll see a mixture of, say, flat screen TVs, but also like really old school modems where you connect to the internet, and a really, I don't know what you call that sound, but where it dials in, like the old AOL sounds come in.
Yeah, and I guess so, like on this bottom right-hand corner, we have kind of our bars. Why these 4 bars? Because I think, right, like in this first simulation, our little buddy here didn't really want to start doing his job until he got a little bit of self-esteem boost from playing a game where he could win. So yeah, how did you choose these 4 kind of criteria that we have to build up to be able to do certain tasks?
Yeah, so the 4 needs on the lower right, as well as the needs that sort of show up on the top left, the cognitive and aesthetic needs, and as well as the other ones that are going to come up, are all based loosely on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is, I guess, a concept in psychology um, about personal needs. And in order to achieve higher needs, you've sort of got to sort out your basic needs. So having low self-esteem, for one, was preventing Manny from progressing in his career. Wendy has problems with working too hard, so she has to constantly go back and forth between investing in her health and not, in order to invest in her aesthetic desires. This game is very much about that, about like what makes you happy and what makes you progress. And your role as the player, you're sort of this hand cursor, is you're sort of taking care of and nurturing these characters and trying to get them to be their best self. That will flip a little bit later, but that's your role for right now.
Gotcha. So I guess this is just the demo, and the game will be coming out later in the year. I guess what is your like quick pitch to people who maybe haven't played something like this before to try out either the demo or try out the game when it comes out?
Well, I don't know as far as a quick pitch, but I can describe the game a little bit, and that this world here is the world of free agency is a computer program. It's inhabited by these little computer people, where each agent has a room, and each room has objects, and each object has actions, and each action has its own consequences. And the primary design goal here is to just hook players into a simple to digest world. But we also intend to deliver a satisfying experience of narrative within that simulation, with existential humor and a philosophical bent.
I mean, I think that you had brought up the film inspirations. I think that combined with this pitch, I think will actually hopefully tempt a lot of people, because the films that we tend to program and the audience that we've cultivated does enjoy these more kind of challenging dives. So I would absolutely recommend, if you like Synecdoche, if you like Truman Show, that trying I guess like an interactive version of these games or of these stories would be worth your time. What's the timeline for when the full game will be out, or if you can give an idea of that?
Yeah, 2021. We don't have a specific month or a quarter to announce yet, but we're making good progress on it. So just look out for 2021. You can look up Free Agency on Steam and add it to your wish list in order to be notified when it goes live.
Amazing. Yeah, I was talking about GJ's, or the more pandemic-y game that She's Meow has come out with. I still am in love with these choices to have these real kind of photorealistic textures alongside these more like cute options. I think that it's an aesthetic that in the previous discussion it was about being cozy. And so I'm excited for when the cozy visual aesthetic and the existential crises will clash as you get further into the game. But awesome. Thanks, Ryan. So we're going to move on to our next game, which I actually would say is a cozy game, or slightly cozy in terms of visual aesthetic, which is Koshka's Cafe. So we have Michelle and Cloud and Jasmine here from the team. If one of you guys could just describe what it is, and I'm gonna start loading the game.
Yeah. My name is Michelle, and I'll just give a brief description. So you play as Katarina Koshka, and she's inherited her father's coffee shop, and she returns home after his death, trying to find closure. But in the process, she meets members of the community, tries to make their orders, and sometimes their specials. And in the process, a predatory corporation tries to buy out the cafe. So you have to navigate that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first thing that really drew me to the game is the art style. Could you talk a little bit more about what the inspiration there was?
Yeah, so I'm the artist. Actually, this game was made in a very tight timeline. It was like a 3-week sprint. So the black and white was mostly for time constraints. Plus, I really like a sketchy aesthetic, and keeping it that way, not cleaning up the lines because it kind of added to the feel of it.
Yeah, and I think they're, I don't know, animal people. Like, I don't know what the best way to say it is, but the art style is so wonderfully expressive, even for kind of the few frames that we get to see them cycle through. I guess how much of the character design process was making sure that you could show the maximum amount of expressions in the limited amount of time that you had.
Yeah, we had a list of characters that we actually wanted to do more characters, but we solidified these personalities. Here's Baba. She's so cute. And it was important to give feedback to the player through happy, sad, and normal emotes. So because player feedback is so important, we really wanted to accentuate that.
Yeah, I'm trying to I had already played the game a little bit. I'm like, can I still remember their orders? But the other thing that I thought was really interesting about uh, the game is the sound, the design of it. So part of it is the visual, part of the sound is this kind of Russian influence. Where did that kind of come into the development?
I'll let Cloud speak on that. He's our amazing sound designer.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as you can probably tell from the name, we have a very heavy Russian influence on our narrative, starting from the name. So we kind of thought maybe we can bring this whole audio design into the Russian realm. So I did research into some Russian folk songs, and then I searched for the instrumentation, and it just started from there. Try to make it sound more like Russian folk song friendly style.
I guess where did the kind of Russian influence came in, and we're starting to get into some more plot now. But yeah, where I guess how early on did the Russian kind of element come into the game?
Jasmine, do you want to speak on that?
Yeah.
She's our narrative designer.
Yeah, sure. So I did the narrative design, and it was like pretty early. We wanted to do a sort of like a coffee shop in an ethnic sort of neighborhood of like a New York City type city. And so we settled, we really liked animal puns. So we settled on Little Moss Cow. And so that was sort of like, we built everything around that. There's a lot of puns in this game. We like puns.
I mean, I think, I don't know, I always kind of put together like puns and like online Flash style games together. I think they're like kind of impossible to remove from each other. But I think that may be just like a 90s, early 2000s kid problem. And so the narrative is really interesting because it kind of gets deep really quickly if you're willing to kind of read into the story a little bit. Could you talk a little bit more about what I guess thematically you're hoping the player to kind of go through emotionally?
Yeah, so we definitely wanted like a sort of more, I guess, like serious experience, even though it's sort of couched in this like sort of cute like aesthetic. And the story that we're telling is like not like completely sort of like autobiographical, but certainly like drawn from like the strained relationships that like people who are like our age can have with their parents. and we sort of really wanted to like capture that in this game. I'm sorry, my dogs are barking.
It's okay.
But
No, go. Please keep
oh,
going.
okay, yeah. So we were like, I guess it does get kind of like serious, especially with sort of like the way that her father treated her and stuff like that. And it took like a really sort of long time to sort of solidify the relationship and how that was going to go, and how we were going to and eventually resolve it. But yeah, it was when I finally like turned in the script and it was like done, I was like, a huge weight has like been lifted off of me.
Oh.
And it was just really sort of cathartic to finish the script and have the story out there. It was like therapy or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of good storytelling is free therapy for ourselves. The other element of the gameplay that I thought was really interesting and that is not explained is that you kind of have to memorize people's orders. And how early on did you know that you were gonna make people try to pay attention and not just kind of achieve, another stage? And how integral was that to the actual kind of overall narrative of the game?
Yeah, we probably decided this pretty early on. Cloud and I are like coffee maniacs, apparently. And a lot of players get really scared as soon as they see that, but it's actually not that bad, especially since this experience is short. But it's interesting how much you do pay attention when you think that you aren't. And the coffee orders, I think, were very key to the personalities. So it ended up always working well. I don't think people usually forget that first order or something. So even though it strikes a little bit of fear, it's a good player experience.
Yeah, no, I felt sucked back into like my bartender waiter days where I was like, oh, I did have to remember that. Or I did have to connect an order to a face. So I felt immediately personally connected to the action for whatever reason. So now we're seeing Bill, and we're seeing kind of a choice that we haven't maybe personally connected to Kat in a way to understand exactly why she made the decision to go corporate. Can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to introduce this kind of gentrifying element to the story?
Jasmine, do you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, definitely gentrification was a sort of like topic that we definitely wanted to cover. Like as soon as we decided like, oh, we're going to tell a story about like a local coffee shop. And I brought up to the group like the notion that like Starbucks like actually sometimes will have like a sort of front coffee shop where it looks like a sort of normal independent coffee shop, but then like if you like look at the fine print, it's like actually a Starbucks. And I thought that was like one of the most like evil things I could ever like think of. So I was like, well, what if that sort of happened to Katka? And yeah, it's we initially wanted to like branch and sort of be like, well, maybe if you like do well, then like you don't get bought out. But time makes things like very difficult, and we had to scope down. And I think ultimately though the sort of decision, it adds something like sort of different and unexpected to the story, that sort of complicates like Katka's character.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we all have experienced in some way, but to, I guess, be thrown into it and to almost have no choice, right? To suddenly be making pumpkin spice lattes instead of the original menu is, yeah, it is surprising, and I think makes it even more real and makes it that much easier for me to have connected to the story. I don't want to show the whole thing, but the game is available to play just online through itch. Is there anything else in terms of what you guys are working on next, either as a team or separately, or anything else in regards to this game before people maybe jump in and try it?
We will all be working on different student projects that will be probably showing in next year's USC Games Expo, and we'll try to submit them in Game Devs of Color and this festival as well. But you can always follow us on Twitter, and that should be on the itch page if you if you look at that.
Cool. Cloud or Jasmine?
What Michelle said.
Cool. Well, yeah, I highly recommend the game. It's fairly short, I think, all things considered. So it's a nice kind of wind down, I think. So now we're going to move on to a very different style of game, but I love that. So we're going to start with Breakpoint. Nick and Ed, if you want to just give it a quick intro as I try not to immediately explode.
Sure, yeah. I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, when you said wind down, I was like, this is going to be a wind back up.
Which is
So yeah, this is Breakpoint. It's an arcadey, action game. It looks sort of like old twin stick shooters where you're controlling the character with one stick and then you're controlling where you're shooting with the other stick, except the twist here is that you have melee weapons instead of lasers or a gun of some sort. So yeah, the goal is just to stay alive in this endless arena filled with swarms of geometrical shapes that you want to avoid, all while racking up your score and trying to climb up the leaderboard.
As I try to listen to you and also play at the same time. What inspired you to make this game? Because I will say that there's like some nostalgia to me playing this style of game, but at the same time, the melee element definitely changes how my brain works in terms of actually accomplishing the tasks.
Sure. Yeah. This game was concepted during something called a game jam, which is basically 48 hours to prove out a concept and then basically build out the whole concept for the game and then make a playable version of it. During that 48-hour time limit, we basically came up with the essential prototype of this game before it became a released commercial project. So that jam's theme was intentionally broken, and the whole idea behind one of the core mechanics in this game was to make something in a mechanic in a lot of games is to have something called weapon durability, which is essentially if you have a weapon and you use it multiple times, that weapon wears down, and once that weapon is worn down completely, it ceases to be useful, and you essentially have to throw it away. In most games, that's just the core mechanical thing that happens. In this game, when a weapon's durability goes down, it breaks, and when that break occurs, something kind of crazy happens. It explodes, and we use that as a mechanic to clear the screen of enemies that are nearby. This is essentially what turns close shave moments into kind of exciting, exhilarating comeback moments. And one of the reasons why we wanted to make this or rather, one of the ways we made this more of an arcadey kind of retro throwback was by giving it this retro arcade kind of filter. So we were very deliberate in making a style of game that looked very similar to arcade games, older arcade games like Asteroids, but also newer ones that came years later, like Geometry Wars or Waves. And Geometry Wars was a big inspiration to us. We wear that on our sleeve. We're not secret about it or anything like that. We really love that games from that era and games that came afterwards. We really wanted to put a modern twist on it, and all we really wanted to do was we thought we had a handle on melee combat, punchy kinetic combat, and we thought this would be a really fun way to kind of revive retro arcade aesthetic with kind of modern sensibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Geometry Wars inspiration is really clear, and I think the music and the sound effects also reminds me greatly of Geometry Wars. Can you talk a little bit about that process or that inspiration and how you made it a little more unique and yours?
Sure, yeah. We did work with the sound designer, who is not here right now, but I was working closely with him, so I know some of the stuff we traded ideas back and forth a lot. It was actually a pretty difficult process because, like, obviously we didn't want to just steal sounds from Geometry Wars, and we didn't want to just use like chiptune sounds or something like that. They sort of are an easy fallback for retro sounding sounds. So when we were coming up with the sound design for this game, we're like, what do shapes sound like? It's like, it's one thing, for the weapons. The weapons are pretty obvious. Sword sounds like a shing, axe sounds like a whoosh. But for the enemies, it was like, it's so abstract. We really struggled to come up with the right, the right sounding sounds. So really, it ended up just being like, here's an idea. Like the pink guys sort of look like bruisers. Like they're got big shoulders. So like, why don't we make them sound like big guys? So we just like iterated on that back and forth, right? Things like that we would just come up with and then iterate on until we got it sounding mostly right.
Yeah, I mean, there is every time I've died, you've seen the massive leaderboard that I am at the bottom of. How has reception been? Because there are some people that are on the top of the leaderboard that currently have numbers that I cannot fathom at all.
Yeah, it's been pretty thrilling seeing people climb up the leaderboard. We always want that to be like a moment of like, oh, like I want to get up there, rather than, oh, I can never get up there. So I will tell you about one feature that is slightly hidden. So you're going to be at the leaderboard here in a second, I think. And then if you're there, you can click on any of the names and you can play a replay to see like how they got their score.
Ooh, I will die really quickly and
Totally.
Have you noticed any, I guess, trends in how people have been playing that have surprised you, as you're the ones that try to make the game extremely difficult for them?
I think we've seen more or less the same kind of trends that we designed the game around. People, a lot of the way that we made the game's mechanics to be discovered are being discovered in a lot of the ways that we intended. It's when they get to the sort of higher numbers that we sort of see a lot of people employ strategies that we're not necessarily accounting for all 100% of the time. But most of the time, a lot of the hidden mechanics or a lot of the strategies we're quite aware of, because in order to have a kind of high octane, high intensity kind of game like this, you kind of have a lot of deep mechanics that you need to be aware of when you're designing. What has been really nice is being able to converse very not really face to face, but essentially one to one with a lot of the people that are getting on the leaderboards. We have a Discord, essentially, for example, and that Discord has allowed us to connect with a lot of the people, and they've shared with us strategies that they found were effective for them, weapons that they loved, weapons that they hated. What I like, for example, is that in the game there are 5 different weapons that each have evolution trees of their own that grow in power and strength every time you level them up, basically. And one of the nice things is that people are developing their own sense of preference, their own style, and I really like seeing people kind of express and kind of bicker over little things like, oh, I love the axe. Oh, I hate the hammer. What? You just need to get good at the hammer. So there's lots of little like conversation pieces that I think are being had about strategies revolving around the game. So while we don't have, like, say, for example, the narrative chops to be able to discuss something that happened ludonarratively or within a narrative structure that might affect you emotionally, I think we're having a lot of conversation with the audience in a way that I think is really satisfying, especially when people get really into the game and they're playing it in a way that really, I guess you have to find the kind of game to be really your style, of course, as with any game. But for the people that this resonates with, I think they find it really engaging and really fun. It's been really nice to be able to see people's engagement.
Yeah, I mean, watching this much better player play was great. It reminds me one of the games of 2018, 2019 that I really enjoyed, that I have similar vibes to, is Dead Cells, where there is that kind of randomly given weapon option. And again, everybody has their preferences to the point where people are willing to go it alone, right, until they find what they really, really want. So it's really great to see that even in a game that is it looks much more simple than Dead Cells, to have that same kind of community. And again, that you brought it up, that narrative that is, beyond what I think people normally think of when they think of narrative in video games.
For sure.
Yeah, this game does sort of have a narrative. It's just, it's not presented to you, but it is sort of like, oh, I had a close shave with this guy, and then when my weapon exploded, and then it flung across the screen, like I survived. So there does sort of emerge a narrative, even if it's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always so interesting. I think one of when Geometry Wars first came out, like a lot of what the forums were is like, what's the story, right? What's the story behind
so
these wars?
Wonder.
And so I think it's inevitable that even when it's just shapes, those shapes are quite powerful, and we can get emotionally attached to them. What are your plans next? Any plans specifically for this game and what you're working on next?
Sure.
Still
I think we're right. I think we're in support mode essentially for what we're doing with Geometry Wars with Breakpoint. Wow, I call this Geometry Wars. If only we had that level of recognition. We're essentially in support mode, which essentially means that we are looking at a lot of the technical tickets, any reports that we get that are for bugs or issues, or just people responding to the game both positively and negatively. We're keeping an eye on it and just making sure that we're providing support for those people. We're taking a lot of feedback and then we're responding to them and then looking at what we can do in the future for those folks and other folks that may be jumping to the game afterwards. So we're just basically paying attention to a lot of the audience right now and then formulating our plan around that. We do have some ideas as far as like some side projects we're tinkering around with, and then also some things we might be able to do with this game, but a lot of it's still up in the air. We're just focusing on making sure that the people who are playing the game right now are attended to.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to kind of move forward. So the game is available now. People can purchase it now on Steam. Would totally recommend it. Yeah, if you're the type of person who likes to get sucked into doing a task really, really, really well, would recommend. I haven't spent that much time, but I could already tell if I leave this on my desktop, I will not work very well. So thanks so much. And yeah, people can definitely, please do check it out on Steam. And then our last game that we have is actually a game where the devs aren't on this call because they're based in Brazil. And this is also a game that isn't quite available yet. So we feel very, very lucky and grateful and want to say thank you to the Keylocker team for letting us show off this game. You can add it to your wish list if this is something that looks really interesting. So this game, Keylocker, the way that I would describe it is basically Mega Man. It's cool Mega Man. So if you like turn-based Mega Man, which I know some people prefer the platformer version, I actually love the turn-based version. This is a really interesting take on that kind of style, and the art style is, I think, very much inspired by that. And it's a world that where music and fun are basically outlawed. So it's footloose to the extreme, and we play. There are different character classes. We're playing as hacker, and it's just a really really interesting world. I'll show a little bit off, but I have been having a lot of fun with this build, and I'm actually really, really excited for people to try it. As a fan of sci-fi and genre, this is also a really, really great kind of foray into that. It is a little dystopic. It has that kind of retro new wave vibe that was super super duper popular about I would 5 to 6 years ago, and I think it's kind of coming back with Cyberpunk coming out, and this is just kind of the cuter turn-based option. So you play as Bobo, who is the lead, and I feel like I should have gone through more of these dialogue trees. But it is a really cute time. the enemies are cute, which I always have personal thoughts about because it's hard to kill things that are cute, but they will kill you. So you got to do what you got to do. And so, yeah, I just want to show at least a little bit of the combat before we move on to our little discussion. So it's turn-based combat, and it has the additional kind of like timing element of making sure that your move is well placed. So it is timed to the animation, and if there are defense options I totally missed, but it is a great time, and I am not good at playing games and talking at the same time, even if it's a turn-based combat game. But it's a very forgiving game at this point of the build, so it won't make you go all the way back to the beginning of the encounter. It'll just be the beginning of the battle. So even if you fail like I do, you don't have to start completely over. And you aren't able to hear the music too much because I had it kind of pulled down a little bit, but the music is really fun, especially because the combat and the story is based on music. And yeah, it's just a really cute, fun time. It definitely has a bit of those Scott Pilgrim vibes if people like Scott Pilgrim. And I think it is a really just fun time. I don't know exactly. The devs are still working on the builds when it'll be coming out. But again, I highly recommend that people go to Steam and put it on your wish list. I'm really, really excited to learn a little bit more about this world. There are a lot of elements that are dropped in early, details that are dropped in early that you can't act upon immediately. But it is really, really, really interesting. So yeah, that is Keylocker. I'm gonna get out of it, and we're gonna have a little chat with the developers that we do have here. And so yeah, I want to start off first just asking a general question, which is what got you inspired to start developing video games? We'll start with Brian, since we started off way in the beginning with him.
Oh, sure. Well, I used to work in the game industry, and yeah, I used to work on this game Fantage. It was like a big, I guess, a virtual world or MMO, and it was a lot of long hours. A lot of workers were treated very badly, but we really loved the product and really loved what we were doing for the players. This is kind of a common story with our industry. There's all this crunch. There's all this talk these days about unionizing and co-ops and stuff like that. And it kind of happens that a lot of people do sort of leave the industry and they want to make their own games as independent game developers. And we're just one of those people who got kind of churned out by it. And I think that might even show in the kinds of games that we're making, that they're games about our lives, or about hiking in the woods, or about being nice to people, or otherwise. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people go into the industry, they wanted to for a long time, right? They grew up playing games, or they were inspired by games that they've played, and then they eventually get there, and it's kind of a common story that you hear with a lot of developers these days.
Yeah, like Jasmine, Michelle, and Cloud, y'all are still in school building your skills. What made you, I guess, want to be in development? I'll start with Jasmine because she's the closest on my grade.
Yeah, interestingly enough, this is a film festival, and I actually used to work in the film industry. But I I left for a number of reasons. I thought that the film industry was, I mean, there was just a lot of stuff that I was like not really happy with, as far as like people were, I mean, kind of, I'm sorry, but like a little stuck up, and I didn't really, yeah, I didn't really like the environment that much. And then also, like, there were all of these really cool advances being made in like interactive media, and a lot of the executives at the places that I was working at just really didn't understand what was going on. And so I was like, wow, like I feel like, maybe one day this sort of stuff is going to get left behind, and video games might be the way to go. And I'm really glad that I made that decision now, considering all of the present circumstances. But yeah, it was a really sort of scary shift to make initially. And I actually worked in comics before I got into the MFA program at USC. But yeah.
Yeah, Cloud or Michelle?
I'll go. So I was a 90s kid that grew up with a lot of great cartoons, SpongeBob and all those. And so I always knew I was in love with characters, wanted to create characters. And at first I leaned towards like 3D animation or CG. But I realized interactivity in games was a far more interesting format for me to bring characters to life. So it's proven that way for me. But also, I decided to go back to school after working in the industry for a while, because being a female engineer is very tough, no matter what profession you're in. So I'm back in school to try to figure out how I can navigate those hurdles in a better way and make games and characters that I'm proud of. Yeah.
Cool. Cloud?
I'm gonna start with a really lame beginning here. Growing up as a single kid in the family, is like I don't get to play with other people that much because I have to study for other stuffs. But every single friend I had when I was growing up, I made friend with them via video games because I was pretty shy to talk about anything else. But when it comes to video games, I'm suddenly become this very excited kid. So that video game brought me a lot of fun and comfort when I was a kid. So I'm like, this is a great thing that I feel lucky to have it. So I'm like, when I grow up, I want to pass this down. So also, I want to do fun things for my life. So video games is fun. It brings fun to other people. Why not do it? So here we go.
It's a good way to live. Ed, how did you first get inspired or knew that you wanted to get into video games?
Honestly, it's kind of a similar story for me. As a kid, I would play a lot of games and then find a lot of stories that I really, really enjoyed, and that kind of, struck me in a way that a lot of other media didn't. So when I grew up, I followed the straight and narrow path and became a software engineer I worked that job for a while until I decided, I think it's time to, just make something that's my own. And so just set off and started doing the indie game life.
Yeah, and Nick?
Yeah, I was about 4 when my brother and I first held a NES controller in our hands, and from that time, essentially, we had decided that we were going to be game developers in the future. I grew up in a very supportive family and very supportive support network. I enjoyed and had the luxury of enjoying a lot of different type of entertainment. I watched a lot of films with my family growing up, and I read a lot of books. Games just happened to be one of those things that stuck with me for a long time, not only because you could spend a lot of time with them, but because there's a performance element to it. Being involved in something really changes the narrative from something that's a very auteur-driven experience to something that's very personal. And I felt like that was something I really wanted to deliver to people, something that resonated with them. And if it was going to be a challenge to discover how to reach out to people in a very emotional way that would connect to them, even if it is just through silly shapes and making them feel intense for just a moment of time, I feel like it was going to be worth my time to try to pursue that.
Yeah, I think that is a very similar mindset to what a lot of filmmakers feel too. Is we can craft something that will hopefully compel other people to feel something, or even compel them to do an action. So, is your brother also?
He works for Microsoft. Yeah, he works in games. Yeah.
Both achieved your dreams. And I think what's really interesting, and I think one of the reasons why people were curious as to why we started to do this, was how does being a person of color impact the stories that you guys want to tell, as well as your current paths within video games. Brian, I think you have had an interesting path, and you've also started Game Devs of Color. Could you talk a little bit about how your personal experience, as well as maybe viewing the experience of some of your peers, inspired you or compelled you to both work independently and to tell stories that feel true to you and your identity, as well as starting Game Devs of Color?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to speak for other people, but I can speak for how things looked from my perspective, and from what I hear from people talking, that for various people of color, it's hard. Working in the mainstream industry is not necessarily hospitable. Working in indie games is not necessarily hospitable for various people of color. I think there have been many cases where people might not be up for a promotion. People might be expected to work harder and longer hours than their other counterparts. Or for indie games, there are certain support networks that are sort of hidden, or otherwise are not available to everyone. And some of it's not intentional, some of it's systemic, but one way or another, a lot of people. So for Game Devs of Color Expo, you'll notice that a lot of these people are independent developers, or they did launch their own company. And a lot of the times, the story is that they left the mainstream that was not supporting them. So the Game Devs of Color Expo is a community and a yearly event that is specifically for supporting those people. It's entirely run by developers. It's for developers, and we try to do as much as we can to make it as welcoming and as supportive for other developers of color as possible.
Cool. I guess both Jasmine and Michelle and Ed and Nick, as you guys have been in working in the industry, has anything surprised you, or maybe not surprised you, about how people of color are treated, or what stories are allowed to be told?
I can speak a little on that. A lot of it comes from representation of certain characters in games, the prevention of letting protagonists be anything other than a generic white male, or the love interest having to be female, things like that. All of these things culminate into how people would treat someone like me in real life. And people don't notice that frequently when I talk about these subjects. So I've worked on games where I couldn't exactly fight the reason why this character had to be the way it was. Like, I can't speak about some of them, but yeah, it's just a barrier, and one that I would like to fight, but often I'm in a position where I can't. So I love what Brian said about the industry and how some things just aren't intentional. But it would be great if everyone could work towards that kind of change, because it's so subtle, and representation of characters in games is a great way to innovate a new path forward.
Yeah, I think for the experience that I've had, I personally can't say that I've seen too significant of a detriment that I've gone through personally. I think one of the biggest benefits that I've had is that from my experience being a part of Seattle's scene for the independent games developers, the Seattle Indies, they've been very supportive, and they're a very racially diverse group of people. I think that's been a very strong point for me being a participant in their circles. And I felt very welcome, and I felt very capable to explore my visions within that community. And I feel like that's a very strong thing that I feel like everybody should be able to experience. And I feel like through my experiences developing in games, one of the things that I would like to be able to do, even though we've created a game that's very arcadey and very non-representational in many ways, I think that with a lot of our prototypes, we've explored different types of narratives with a lot of the games that and I have worked on, or previous titles that I have worked on in the past. I think, for example, several of the game's protagonists have been primarily female, because there really shouldn't be any reason why you should care, honestly. And I feel like if you want to make it a female lead, you should be able to. I think in spite of what is oftentimes in games the endearing, overwhelming quote-unquote evidence that a lot of mainstream industry auteurs will tell you. And I think that from an indie perspective, one of the things that we want to be able to do and can do and have the luxury of being able to do is to challenge those, challenge the status quo in that way. And I feel like we at least have that capability of having that freedom to explore without the risk of somebody breathing down our necks and telling us that we can't do something because it doesn't meet the mainstream status quo. And I feel like that's something that I wanted to be able to explore. I still feel like I want to be able to explore that. And I feel like a lot of the peoples in Seattle indies, as they're exploring their projects, are able to explore that. I feel like being able to be a developer I'm very glad to be a developer in the way that I am, and I still feel compelled very strongly to explore a lot of narratives that haven't been explored right now in the industry and in entertainment at large.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's so funny how much of what you guys are saying apply directly to film and TV, and that industry is much older and still seems to hit the same speed bumps. And I think in particular for the Asian American community, it can often seem like we go back to square one about every 8 to 10 years. And so it is, I think, heartening to see that, the video game industry hasn't been around for that much longer. But that there's still, I feel like there's more incremental small movement forward than I guess in Hollywood we expect huge leaps forward, and instead we usually like fall flat on our face and get dragged back. So I guess my next question is, what can our kind of community do to be supportive and to help y'all get to maybe whether it be more representation or to where you guys want to go next? I think our community has really luckily started kind of waking up to how they can help indie film and TV producers and writers. What can we do to help indie game devs, and in particular devs of color?
I'll give another shout out to the Seattle Indies community. They're doing awesome work, and in particular, we have a group here that's a subsection of the Seattle Indies community called the Diversity Collective. They're doing meetups, specifically related to diversity and inclusion. So I guess to answer the question more directly, one way is to get involved. People just like us are organizing these meetups and attending and throwing out ideas. I think just doing that helps an immense amount.
Yeah, I could echo that. Just supporting the communities that are already supporting them. It's common to see, for example, at big conferences or big events, maybe there's like a diversity panel where you get a token person from each race to come and talk about what it's like to be that token race in this big conference. But, other communities where it already is diverse, that's just the first step, right? Then there's inclusion, and then there's just letting people be what they're an expert at. And so that's part of our mission at the Game Devs of Color Expo. Nobody's there talking about plainly diversity. They're there because they're a talented developer, or they're there because they're a talented artist, or whatever they are. So I think supporting indies in the field and in the way that they are expressing their talents is just great to do if you can do that.
Yeah, I definitely echo that sentiment about if you're a developer, I'd say that a lot of the impetus is on you to get involved. A lot of the reasons why change is not made in a lot of cases is not because people are actively working against it. Obviously, that is happening sometimes, but sometimes it's just because the people who really want to make a decision moving forward just don't know how or don't know what decisions to make. And it's not because they're trying to keep things from moving. They just don't know what moves to make. So being involved will help make those decisions move forward. So it really is about looking at the mirror and saying to yourself, if you want to make some change, make that in yourself and be that change if you have the capability. Obviously, people are in different positions, so don't. It's not always, the umbrage is not always on you. But that's from a developer perspective. From a publishing or distributor's perspective, obviously I'm preaching to the choir here, but keep an open mind. Always challenge the status quo and be open-minded to people who are. That's going to be very integral to allowing change to happen. Don't let your base instincts always drive your decisions moving forward. Always challenge the idea of what you can be doing and what you should be doing. There are instincts there for a reason, but some of them are not always in the best interests of others, and you really should be thinking from a communal sense. This isn't just about your best interests. This is about us as a whole, and about inclusivity as a better thing for everybody. That includes race, gender, any type of inclusion you can think of. Think about how that affects a lot of other people, and take that umbrage upon yourself to do something about it if you can. I understand that this is a very difficult thing for a lot of people, because it's a lot of if you make a bad move forward, it can make a bad example of yourself. And I think in that way, if someone is trying to do something that you can see is good intentioned, try not to condemn them too much. There's going to be a lot of faltering back and forth with a lot of people trying to make good decisions, but try to read the intention of people who are trying to make the community better for everybody else, and try to participate and try to get involved, challenge your base instincts, and be as inclusive as possible. I think that's probably, from all around, I think, better instincts that we can follow.
Yeah. Jasmine or Michelle?
Well, I can speak to something that, like, I guess I've been involved in. One of the ways that we can sort of like move to advocate for our community is definitely like sort of unfortunately like doing the work ourselves. Like like starting game as a caller like is like really cool. I've been involved in, I'm a moderator on a trans game dev server, and I want to say that we have like basically every like transgender or gender non-conforming like video game developer like out there like on this server right now, which is like really cool. And it's just really, the goal is to like allow for like us to build our own like networks, because I mean a lot of jobs come through like, oh, I know someone or things like that. As far like from what I understand, a lot of the jobs in the game industry, it's very rarely that someone picks up a resume from the pile and is like, oh, this person's a cool candidate. It's usually like, there are the resumes in the pile, and then there's like, oh, well, my friend or I know someone who does like this sort of work, and then they sort of can get fast tracked into a position. So building those networks that include people of color, and like people from marginalized sexualities and marginalized gender identities as well, is sort of something that we can like do ourselves, which is like it's not ideal that we have to do the work ourselves. Like like ideally, like white people and cis and het people would be making space for us, but sometimes we have to do the work ourselves, and that's what I've been doing, at least.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of us that are a little tired of doing it, but I think you're right, where sometimes we have to suck it up and just do it. Michelle or Cloud, any thoughts about what we could be doing?
I can speak something. I haven't been working in the industry long enough to say anything about the industry, but I really want to echo from previously said, challenge the pre-established assumptions, and then keep an open mind. So I've been experiencing quite some time about like because I'm a foreigner to United States, so every time there's a cultural implication in a dialogue, I would break out of the dialogue and going straight to ask, what do you mean by this? What does it imply? So I learned a great deal from this kind of questions, and I think it challenged my previous assumptions about American people a lot. So I'm thinking, like, I'm doing the reverse thinking. Maybe if people can keep an open mind and then do a lot of askings, say, if they meet me, for example, as a Chinese, and then they simply ask some assumptions that they made and they are right now aware of, and then to like prove if their assumption is right or not, and then learn from the answer, I think a lot will be changed.
Cool. Michelle?
Yeah, I'll speak mostly from the industry side. I think I worked at two types of companies. Both will say that they are diverse and inclusive, but one will not have the policies in place. They will confuse just having an open-minded or like company atmosphere or something with actually shaping company culture. So having real policies that ensure equal pay, proactive hiring measures, things like that, those are very important because you can't just have a mindset. You have to put the actions behind the words. So I've worked at two different types of companies where if I say something is wrong or I bring something up, the answer is either that's just the way it is, or they will actually try to help me. So that's just a life lesson that I took on how to judge where a company is at with diversity and inclusion. But if someone has the power to actually do that kind of change, maybe just set the groundwork for some actual policies, no matter how big or small the team is or the company. Yeah.
I think that is good advice all around for any company, whether it be video games or not. But I want to thank all of y'all for being here, for answering these questions, for having this conversation, as well as sharing your games with us. So some of these games are available to play right now. The link should be in chat. And then some of them, please put in your Steam wish list and keep an eye out for them when they do come out. Keylocker and Free Agency are both on Steam ready to be wish listed. And Koshka's Cafe and Breakpoint are available now for you to play. Thanks again to our lovely panelists, and I want to thank our amazing AIF community for being open-minded enough to let us have not just one game night, but 2 game nights with amazing developers. I know, speaking from the programming side, we are so excited to hopefully keep doing this and keep showcasing great developers of color and great games that they've made. We are on day 7 of the festival. We have until Sunday, so please look at our lineup at aif.org. There's still lots of films and shorts and lots of other stuff, including some really great VR films available to watch. And thank y'all so much. We'll see y'all tomorrow.